Hi guys, welcome to another tutorial. So today we are drafting a wrap top. So first and foremost, you all know that we normally use 1 inch as our starting line, which I'm marking out. And after marking out my 1 inch, I'm going to use 1 inch again to mark out my zipper because we are going to start from the back panel. After marking out my 1 inch, I'm going to use my stretch rule to connect the lines like so. After connecting my zipper lines, I'm going to measure out my shoulder to waist, which is 17 and a half. So I'm marking my 17 and a half, and I'm also adding half inch for my seam allowance. So I'm going to repeat the same process all through, then use my stretch rule to connect the lines. So right now I'm marking out my neck measurements, and I'm using neck width 3 inch and neck length 1 inch because this is a back panel. So after getting the accurate neck measurements, I'm going to use my stretch rule to make a box or to connect the lines. So after connecting the lines like so, I'm going to use my curve rule to achieve my neck curve. So after curving my neckline, I'm measuring out my shoulder to shoulder measurement, and in this video I'm using 15 divided by 2 will give me 7.5. So I'm marking 7.5 here. After marking 7.5 here, I'm using half inch for my shoulder slope. So I'm going to connect that half inch to my neckline. My armhole I'm using here is 7.75. So after marking it out, I'm going to make a straight line to connect to that 7.5 inches for my shoulder to shoulder measurement. I'm making sure that everything is in straight line. After marking it out, I'm going to extend my armhole to the other side. So I'm going to mark out all my basic body lengths. I'm starting from my shoulder to chest 7, shoulder to bust 10.5. So after, I'm going to connect the lines. So right now I'm using 4 inch for my dart line, and I'm marking 4 inch from my waist and also on my bust. So I'm going to connect that 4 inch lines. After connecting, I'm going to mark out 1 inch down from my bust line. This is where my dart will stop, or where my dart will start. So after, I'm continuing my chest measurements in order to make a straight line. So right now I'm marking out my dart leg. So I'm using half inch on the folding side, and I'm using 1.5 inch on the seam allowance side. This is for the front panel. You can see that I'm marking out 1.5 inch for my front panel, and I'm connecting the lines to that 1 inch I marked down. So I'm going to mark out 1 inch again for my back panel, making the left and the right side of my dart leg to be half inch, which is your normal dart measurement. So after, I'm using my curve rule to make my armhole curve. Remember, the reason why I used 1.5 inch is 1 inch is the difference between my front and my back panel. So right now I'm dividing my waistline, which is 32. 32 divided by 4 will give me 8. So I'm adding that 2 inches for my dart for the front panel, and I'm marking 10. So after I'm dividing my back panel, which is 38 divided by 4 will give me 8. 8 plus 1 will give me 9, which I marked out. So right now I'm dividing my bust, which is 38. 38 divided by 4 will give me 9.5. So that is what I marked out, and I'm going to connect the lines. The first line is for the back panel, while the second line is for the front panel. So before cutting out, I'm going to fold my zip allowance. I'm going to fold it in. After folding it in, I'm going to cut out, because when placing on your front panel, we don't need the zipper. We don't need the zipper measurement. So right now, after folding, I'm going to cut it out. Remember that we didn't add seam allowances to any of this. And also, if you notice, I didn't cut out the front mark out or the front measurements. I traced it out using the front panel. So after, I'm going to cut out the back right measurement or accurate measurement. So after cutting it out, I turned my pattern paper, then folded it into two. Then after folding into two, I'm now pinning in order for my paper not to shift. So after pinning it down, I'm using my tracing wheel to trace out all my lines. But the lines that I'm tracing, I'm not tracing out anything that concerns the back, only for the front. So I'm also going to use the back neckline. I'm going to trace out the back neckline in order to guide me on what to do or for the neckline. So after cutting it out, and I'm unpinning and I'm removing the back panel. So now I'm separating my folded front panel. So after unfolding it, I'm marking out my traced lines, which is my chest line, my bust line, my dart legs. I'm also marking out my main line, my main full length. So right now my front panel is ready. So now is the time to mark out our wrap dress. So from the chest line, I marked out 1 inch. So on the seam allowance side, I'm going up by 3 inches. Remember that we have used 1 inch down for the neckline. So I'm coming down by 7.5 inches. So I'm cleaning the first 1 inch that we marked out. So from that center, I'm marking out 1 inch again as a replacement for the other one that we cleaned out. So after, I'm going to use that 1 inch as a guide, and I'm using a dotted line. I'm using a dotted line as a guide and also to make a perfect curve. Remember that your curve must match up with that 3 inches that you marked out on the seam allowance side. So once my wrap curve is okay and accurate for me, now the next thing for me is to trace it out. Remember that we didn't add the zipper measurements, we coded it in before tracing it out. So that is not the part we are going to use. We are going to use the one that have a half cut wrap. So this is it, guys. This is the main pattern for the wrap dress, the front panel and the back panel. So remember that all these things that we didn't add our seam allowance, so I'm using another pattern that I drafted earlier to match out, to make sure that my neck depth is not that deep. So the total neck depth that we use for this tutorial is 8. So after cutting out, I'm going to place my pattern on my fabric, and I'm starting now to add my seam allowances, and I am using 1.5 inches for my side seams. And after marking out, I'm pinning my fabric to my paper, or my paper on my fabric. Don't worry, guys, I hope you understand all this. So pinning make it easier for me not to make mistake, and my paper not, or my pattern not to shift from my fabric. So right now I'm adding again 1.5 inch on the other side. Remember to fold your fabric into two, because the front panel have two pieces. So I'm making a straight line to connect the lines, or my seam allowances. So on the wrap parts, I'm using 1/2 inch like so, and I'm connecting the lines. This 1/2 inch serves as my seam allowance. For this tutorial, if you like, you can use your lining to cut to you can use your lining as interface, but I'm using bias as interface for this tutorial. So also on the shoulder line, I used 1/2 inch also. On the armhole, I used 1/2 inch also. So after adding my seam allowances, I'm going to start cutting it out. So I'm separating the fabric because I folded it from the jumper. Then after, I'm notching out my dart lines. So for the back, I'm also adding 1/2 inch. I'm also adding 1.5 inch on the side seam, adding 1/2 inch on the armhole, neckline, and also on the shoulder slope. I didn't add any inches on the zip allowance. So after adding all the necessary seam allowances, I'm tracing it out, or cutting it out. Now